In this video, I will be exposing and debunking the lies of the Dark Souls fandom reviewers. Let's go back to the one who started it all, PewDiePie. PewDiePie is not a reviewer, he is just a handsome guy who was fooling around in video games, making somewhat funny commentary. He mentioned many times in his Dark Souls playthroughs that those are the hardest games he has ever played. PewDiePie is not someone who has played enough games to know which games are the hardest ones or what exactly makes a game hard, so I'm going to assume he was mostly joking, but of course that didn't stop his 9-year-old fandom from taking him very seriously and pretending that these games are actually hard. Dark Souls, Slenderman, Five Nights at Freddy's, these are all bad franchises which became very popular because that's how much power the influencers have. All those attention-whoring influencers who are constantly following trends have a huge following of children who are incapable of understanding irony, satire, jokes, or seeing through bullshit and scams, which means they can easily be manipulated into believing a completely false narrative. Let's start with Videogamedunkey. Dunkey for the most part is just fooling around, but in his Elden Ring review he tried to make a point about Elden Ring being too hard.
And I say it's too hard. I am calling this game out. Not because it's a bad game, but because it's an incredible game that is held back by very poor balancing. Many of your deaths in this game do not feel earned, like dying to this stupid shit or losing 70,000 runes to the wonky platforming. So many enemies in this game can kill you in 1 or 2 hits, or kill you with a combo that comes out so fast it feels like 1 hit, or they can stun you into another hit which also feels like a 1-hit kill, or they can just kill you in 1 grab, straight up. Look at this dude. He cannot actually turn around to attack you. He is worth 3,300 XP. Then you have this guy who can do this, and he can say this, or he can say this, and he has this move too. This guy, who has a ton of health by the way, is worth 3,800 XP. Only 500 more than the guy who can't turn around. Ow, wah! You think that's fucked up though? Look at these guys. They're literally sleeping. Watch what happens when I hit L2. I just got 20,000 XP for that.
Tough enemies which are hard to kill, giving you less souls than enemies which are easy to kill, destroys his own argument about the game being hard. Obviously, since you can gather souls by beating easy enemies, you can become quickly overpowered and use that power to deal with the strongest enemies. And also even the toughest super boss in this game can be easily cheesed and trivialized. So not only is the game easy, it's poorly balanced as well. Moving on to the next very popular guy, Penguin Zero, also known as Moist Critical, and Charlie White.
I'm sure by now the majority of you have seen the reviews. 10 out of 10 is pretty much across the board, 100% on most major outlets. This thing is the goddamn valedictorian of gaming, it seems.
He starts right off the bat saying it's one of the best games just because of its popularity, which is not even an opinion or anything. It's just what ship-minded people think defines quality, because they don't have a brain of their own to actually evaluate things. They always need to follow herds. But maybe he'll make an argument about why it's so good later on, right?
Just like everyone's saying, the game is the culmination of everything From Software learned over the last decade or so of making the Souls series, plus Bloodborne and Sekiro, all rolled into the perfect package. Just this amazing entree, this beautiful dish that's so tasty even Gordon Ramsay would shit himself and come at the same time. It is unbelievable what they've been able to do here.
So he says Elden Ring is supposed to be a combination of everything From Software has learned from all their previous games. Now that's an extremely funny thing to say, because I could easily argue Elden Ring doesn't even have the best combat in the Soulsborne franchise, and to say they have learned from their past games when they have learned absolutely nothing. They never even knew anything to begin with. Their core combat was always as basic as possible. Just press the dodge roll button when you see an enemy attack and use basic attacks to deal damage. That's how it has always been, and the balancing got actually even worse. So up till now, he has been speaking directly out of his ass.
Going into this knowing it was going to be open world, I expected it to just be kind of open world, like a pseudo open world. Not really fully realized, pretty primitive, because it's their first foray into that kind of ballpark. And I thought they were just going to dip their toes in it. They didn't. They dipped their entire fucking sack in here. They cannonballed into this pool. The world is massive. Absolutely massive. And it doesn't feel tedious to traverse, and it also doesn't feel dead. Because there's a lot of enemies, and there's a lot of just like open world mini bosses scattered throughout, dragons that you can kill.
The open world is pretty much pointless outside of the beauty and a couple of good level design choices. Most of the enemies have been reskinned and reused, and the same goes for the bosses and mini bosses. In fact, I think Elden Ring is the game with the least unique bosses in the entire franchise. He is clueless, and it's not like it would matter much if the enemy variety was actually huge, because the combat is pretty much non-existent. It's never interesting. You master it in like 5 minutes and you do the exact same thing in every enemy you fight. That cannot be interesting or even stimulating to anyone with a brain.
And just exploring, you'll find caves, you'll find unique items, you'll find unique NPCs that'll end up going back to one of the hub worlds, and you can talk to them, learn more about them, complete quest lines from them. It is so good. It really blew me away with just how big the world was. The scope of this game is unlike anything I was expecting going into it.
Many of the dungeons are also repeated so many times, like I don't even understand how can people pretend this game is interesting. It almost managed to put me to sleep so many times. You can blatantly see the lazy design of the developers. It's incredibly blatant too, like you need to actually turn yourself blind to pretend like these games are offering you really that much.
And there's so many layers to it. There's not just one surface level area to explore. It also goes deep underground. For example, there was this elevator in the middle of the forest that I found where you pay a couple keys, you get to unlock it, you go down, and it's unironically like a 6-minute uninterrupted elevator ride straight to hell.
I like how he mentions you need to wait 6 minutes doing nothing in an elevator, just staring at your screen. And that's totally not a flaw, right? Everyone loves wasting their time just staring at an immersive loading screen for 6 whole minutes. That totally can't bother anyone, because apparently everyone is a total basement dweller thinking they have an infinite time in their basement and their parents are immortal. He keeps complimenting the game vaguely for the next couple of minutes until he says this.
Now, I will come out and say I haven't beaten the game yet. I'm 30 hours into the game roughly, and I just have fallen in love with it, which I expected to like it because Souls-like games are my favorite games. It's my favorite genre, and this is one of the very few moist meters I'm making before completing the product, but I'm just so enthusiastic about it, and I'm certain that it's not going to all of a sudden just fucking drop off at the end. It's only going to continue to get better.
So he hasn't even completed half the game, but he's somehow so sure the rest of the game is just going to be good, he rushed up to make a review and telling everyone how the entire game is a total masterpiece, while literally not having a clue about the rest of it, and he even admits it. Is this supposed to be a serious reviewer? Because this is clownery and fanboyism of the highest degree. This is pretty much what it feels like, having Miyazaki's dick stuck in your throat.
But it is very difficult. Most players immediately hit a wall on the very first major enemy encounter. The first boss being the Tree Sentinel, which is the horseback golden halberd boss. A lot of people take 50, 60 deaths in order to beat them because they don't realize you can run by him.
People who didn't realize they can easily get past the Tree Sentinel are beyond any salvation. Their IQ might as well be in the negatives. This is one of the most obviously avoidable boss fights I have seen in any video game ever. You literally have an entire open world and you can literally go to any direction. How in the world can anyone think this is an enemy you actually have to beat is beyond me. I wouldn't be able to comprehend that level of intelligence even if I got lobotomized 100 fucking times.
Most players aren't going to be able to beat him at level 1. I was able to because I'm a fucking turbo gamer. I'm an elite gamer barbarian. I beat him in 21 tries, but most people take more than that.
Typical basement dweller with a shattered ego trying to jerk himself off. There is nothing hard about beating that shitty boss fight. You memorize the patterns, you press a single button to avoid its attacks, and you use another button to attack it. It's the most basic things for all life forms. All life forms are capable of memory, even goldfish, so you are pretty much bragging for having a functionality of a goldfish in your very own review, which is a completely pointless thing to do. No one watches a review to hear how good a reviewer is in a video game.
However, I will say a lot of the challenge came from self-imposed rules upon myself. I didn't use any summons for any of the bosses or anything like that. And I do think if you do use summons, to explain further, it's a new mechanic in the game where you can get these spirits that you can summon to help you fight. Only in certain areas. You can't use them everywhere, but in a lot of boss fight situations and a lot of just general areas, you can summon helpers to help you out, as opposed to just summoning a player or something to help you. You have a built-in mechanic to summon NPCs that will fight alongside you with some of the bosses, as well as just general helping. So I think the game can be super accessible for someone that's not familiar with the genre, and can be a pretty easy experience if you're able to leverage these summons well.
So he literally admits the game itself is not hard, it's actually easy, but he decided to make artificially harder for him because it's his preference. You do realize you can do that with pretty much every single game out there, right? Put a blindfold, close your ears as well, and try playing with only using your nutsack. I'm sure that would make almost every single game hard. If you are a true gamer as you claim, you should do that.
Another thing I was really surprised about is just how many new things they added to the game. I was expecting this to be kind of just more Souls without a whole ton added, but no, they really went all in. Like, aside from just the summoning mechanics, aside from the open world, aside from the horse, they just added so many other features into this game that I didn't expect at all. So you have a lot of different options now. Not just new weapons, not just like new build possibilities, new spells, all that, but just in general, you have a lot of other options. So you can change your weapon arts on the fly by just using different ashes.
Changing your weapon's ability on the fly adds barely any depth to the game. Most of the ashes of war are useless. You always end up sticking to the broken ones. If they added a mechanic that allows you to respec your entire class, so you can actually try out and use all the new equipment and spells you get for free, that would actually be somewhat interesting. That would allow some room for experimentation, but the game being so stingy and tedious is just unworthy of wasting any time trying out to see what's fun. Most people will go to a website to get some help about what's the best builds and spells they can use.
You have the ability to block an attack and immediately counterattack, a guard counter. So if you just successfully block an attack, you don't have to parry it. If you block it and immediately follow it up with a strong, you can do a lot of poise damage to whatever enemy attacked you, and you can just kind of fuck them right in the butt pretty hard because you take almost no damage from a successful block, and you can immediately counterattack. So think of it this way: if someone's blasting a whole combo at you, maybe you dodge the first two, and then block the last one, and then you can get that strong counter for big damage to maybe stagger them for a visceral.
The blocking with your shield and counter-attacking right afterwards doesn't add any depth either. It's an extremely basic mechanic, and it shows how stupid From Software developers are for not having it in their very first game. And he keeps saying about the games having so many options, but he doesn't really mention any. He keeps it vague, because in reality there aren't. No matter what you do, you always end up playing in melee combat, the dodge roll simulator game, or you end up spamming broken spells at range without even trying or thinking. Those are the only two real playstyles this genre ever had.
There's just a lot of options, and there's now a dedicated jump button. I didn't realize just how fucking cool a dedicated jump button would be in Souls. I've always liked the idea of it as like a wet dream, but actually having it here is such a nice treat, and it gives you more options in a fight again. So you can do like a jumping strong attack, which does a lot of damage, as well as a lot of poise break, so again you can stagger an enemy and get a visceral off of it. So there's just a lot of new things here, all of which are welcomed additions to the formula.
The jump button gives you only one extra option in battle, and it's not even an option, it's pretty much mandatory for strength builds because their basic attacks are usually too slow, so by doing a jump attack you skip all the slow animations, and that's why you see so many of the strength builds in PvP doing jump attacks all the time. So much for having multiple options when everyone plays the exact same way.
I absolutely love everything about Elden Ring. I think it is tied with Bloodborne for the most beautiful of the Souls series, and my god, I just can't get enough of it.
Bloodborne is garbage just for being a 30 FPS game alone.
Plugging Elden Ring into the moist meter, I'm giving it a 95%. It would have been a 98 because I really do think this is as close to perfect as you can get with like an open world action game, but the performance problems are really widespread, so while I myself didn't have too bad of a time with the FPS dropping or crashing or any problems with the PC, I know a lot of other players did, and it is a pretty widespread issue that will hopefully be addressed very soon, but As of right now, that is the only major problem with the game. But once they iron that out, I actually just cannot think of a single thing that this game doesn't do well. Yeah, there's a couple of bugs and glitches, but it's a massive open world game. Of course, there's going to be a couple moments where you clip into a rock in the middle of nowhere. None of them are game breaking. There is, however, a little bugginess to the horse that does kind of fuck you sometimes, where if you try and get on the horse too quickly, you might just freeze yourself. But the open world game horse always going to be buggy, and it's so infrequent that it never becomes a huge glaring issue. I really can't imagine a better Souls game or a better open world action game in general. It's so well done, and only a couple of super minor hiccups, like a couple of blemishes. Like, it's nothing major. It is so incredibly polished and so well done. Elden Ring is nothing shy of a landmark achievement for From Software. The game is absolutely amazing.
So he just gave it a 95% score without really offering any important information on why the game is good. He just kept vaguely praising it like a game journalist, and he can't even imagine a better Souls game, even though he is supposed to have played almost all of them multiple times. Plus, he is incapable of imagining a better action RPG game. That speaks volumes about his imagination, if anything else. Clearly, he is not the most creative guy out there, especially if you take a look at his content, when he just jumps on every little shitty trend and drama like a teenage middle schooler airhead who refuses to grow up. By the way, this is the same guy who couldn't figure out Final Fantasy VII Remake's combat. He played the game like shit, and in his review he said the combat is very tedious, which is the most wrong thing he can say about the combat, because it's actually the opposite of tedious. You can literally kill every single enemy and boss, including the hardest super boss in the game, in a couple of seconds if you are really good at the game. But of course you can't expect too much intelligence or even effort from a guy who just talks out of his ass in his reviews. He also has a video named Bloodborne is the best Souls game, while in that video he straight up admits it's actually Dark Souls 3, the best one, because apparently he has dementia and forgot about the jumping mechanics of Bloodborne he so much hates. These people play these games so many times, and they are memory based games, yet they don't even have the memory to remember the very few mechanics of these games or which one is their actual favorite.
The range on that is actually nuts. Holy fuck. That's, you know, I'm gonna say maybe I like Dark Souls 3 more than Bloodborne just because of this fucking jump. I don't remember this when I played it originally. I don't recall jumping after every sprint. Going from sprint to jump sucks instead of sprint to roll. It's always been like that. I don't doubt that it always has, I just don't remember it.
Now let's take a look at the Actman with his Why is Dark Souls 1 a masterpiece video with more than 5 million views.
What's this? Dark Souls? Well, I've heard of it. They say it's pretty hard. But at this point in time, the game's difficulty hasn't been beaten like a dead horse by crappy unoriginal game journalists. And for those reasons, I'll check it out. What the fuck did I just play?
We are not even a single minute in the video, and he already lied once by implying he finished the game in only 40 hours, which is pretty much impossible for a first timer. There is just way too many things to explore and way too many things to learn through trial and error. Nothing to do with skill, really. Doesn't matter how good you are at the game. The games don't require skill, they require a learning curve, and you cannot obtain that knowledge in that short amount of time by yourself unless you are constantly getting your hand held by guides on the internet or summoning your friends to help you with the boss fights. And based on what he said in the beginning, implying he actually wants a hard game, you would think he didn't really get any help, but he actually has a video named Why an Easy Mode Would Ruin Dark Souls, in which he admits he actually does get internet help when he gets stuck.
Demon's Souls. Oh boy, this kicked everyone's ass their first time playing. And me too, I was sitting there like, how the hell do I beat the Flame Lurker? Where the shit do I get materials to upgrade my gear? What is World Tendency? Why is half my health bar missing? What the fuck? But you know what I did when I had trouble? When I couldn't figure out what to do or where to go? I sought help.
Wait, that's illegal.
Stop it. Get some help.
Yes, from the internet and the game. Let me make it clear, there's absolutely nothing wrong with asking people tips or looking up a guide. I think you should only do that when absolutely necessary. Like after dying to the Dragon God for the 7th time, it's like, okay, fuck it, just tell me how to beat this asshole. Souls games are built around community interaction. The difficulty encourages discussion and engagement. Oh, how did you beat Ornstein and Smough? What weapons did you use? Where did you find those? Really, the best armor in the game is in Anor Londo, huh? Oh, and I can also summon Solaire for this fight? I should try that.
So in his very video, where he tries to explain why an easy mode would ruin Dark Souls, he completely destroys his own point by coming out as another noob who just gets internet help, while being a hypocrite in that very video, telling everyone to get good and how challenge matters and makes you better and all that bullshit the stupid fandom keeps repeating, while avoiding to look in the mirror.
There's been an argument against video games for many years, claiming they aren't true art. Now, if I were to choose one game that I'd force those dickbags to sit down and play from start to finish in hopes of changing their minds, my first choice is Dark Souls and BioShock 1. Because this is the type of experience that you could show an English teacher or a poetry class and they'd be like, yeah, can you make me 50 copies of this exact experience but in novel forms?
So his main points about why this game is so good is 1. The art style. Now the art style is occasionally good. It gives me kind of a horror vibe with how all these monstrosities and areas are designed. But the problem is that kind of art style does nothing to me in a game that plays like a dodge roll simulator. If this was some kind of horror game with actual puzzle mechanics that requires actual brains, then maybe I would appreciate the art style more, because then it would matter somehow. But since I know every single enemy, whether it's just a simple creature or a godlike boss fight that can destroy the entire world, can be easily beaten by pressing one single button to avoid every single one of their attacks and another one to deal damage to them. That's why none of the stuff shown is even remotely scary, and the only times I got slightly spooked or startled were times when I was carrying a lot of souls and I was trying my best to stay alive without knowing what kind of bullshit I might deal with. That has really nothing to do with the art style, it's just the game's mechanics that want to punish you for literally no reason, just because it's a trial and error game and it likes to pretend it's hard. So the only times I was afraid, it was because I was only afraid of losing progress and having even more of my time wasted. None of the wannabe scary stuff is even remotely scary.
The plot is minimalistic and it's up to the player to come to their own conclusions. You fill in the blanks, and there's a fuck ton of blanks to fill in. Now there's always the possibility that by making your story vague and confusing, it ends up making no sense and being vague and confusing. But then there's the other side where you have a unclear story, but the experience is so enchanting it makes you want to know more.
His other point about the games being good is the lore and the story. Once again, it doesn't even matter how good they are. No matter how much the game tries to hype up an enemy, you still know there will be one way of avoiding them and damaging them. No matter what the trailers show, even if the best artists in the world, along with the best storytellers in the world, came together and created the most epic and insane looking boss that has ever existed in all fiction, it would still hold zero interest to me because of the combat. From the very beginning, you know exactly how you will be fighting every enemy and boss just by realizing what the genre's core gameplay is all about. The gameplay is the video game's soul. Everything else that's revolving around it is decoration. No matter how good the decoration is, without a proper soul, the game is just pure trash. And of course what I just said means nothing to all these losers who play the Souls-likes, because they have zero standards for gameplay. They actually consider this kind of crappy gameplay a masterpiece as well.
So by persevering through failure, you, the chosen undead, will feel great satisfaction when you overcome those challenges that gave you so much trouble. You will run up against an enemy that seems unbeatable. You will die, you will fail. But it doesn't matter how many times you are slain, how massive and impossible the road ahead might seem, because so long as you push against the inevitable and learn from failure, you will survive in Lordran and you will survive the real world. Life is about overcoming challenges, solving problems, and carving some meaning out of your existence. What value does a person's life have if they don't strive to accomplish something? What satisfaction do you get from life when there are no problems to solve? Now when it comes to gameplay, the combat in Dark Souls has a lot of depth too. There's so many cool weapons and badass armor in this game. You can look like an onion, for Christ's sake. That's the armor Shrek would wear. Certain styles of weapons have different movesets, and everything has its advantages, disadvantages, and requirements.
All these things he says are really funny because they are coming from basement dwellers, such as himself. You are not really solving any problems or overcoming any challenges. You are doing the bare minimum of any life form. You are just memorizing stuff. There are no reflexes needed or brains needed to do anything in these games. I can't remember a single segment in these games that required skill. But of course these losers need to keep being pretentious so they can feel better about themselves, since they are actual basement dwelling losers in real life. They keep repeating that the combat has a lot of depth when they present none. None of the builds add any depth. You are still playing a dodge roll simulator, no matter what you wear, and having advantages and disadvantages against things isn't deep either. It's just like rock, paper, scissors. It's a basic thing.
Need to be smart about what you invest in. Pro tip, resistance is the best stat to level. I max it first. But this is where the currency, souls, what else did you think it would be, comes into effect. Souls are the lifeblood of your journey. If you die 2 times in a row without returning to the spot you first perished, you'll lose all the souls you had. You want to avoid this at all cost. But you also need to carry enough souls to be able to actually buy things, and I love this risk-reward playstyle that Dark Souls offers, because the 2-death system means that you didn't learn from your first mistake and you made it again. If you can't get back to the spot that you first died.
The game doesn't just punish you for not learning from your first mistake. It constantly punishes you and kills you in many trolly ways you can't possibly expect. And there are a lot of bullshit bugs as well. But of course they need to pretend none of that is real, so they can keep complimenting these bullshit games.
There's plenty of builds to experiment with, and that's where the fun begins. Because you can't realistically cover everything in one playthrough. You have to make decisions about what playstyle you like best so you can optimize in it or try to find a general balance in between. Some weapons hit hard, but they weigh you down and are easy to dodge. Others can inflict status effects, and all the sets of armor offer different levels of protection.
There is nothing fun about experimenting with the builds, because they all play the exact same way, dodge roll and attack. And you can't even actually experiment because of the extremely tedious system that requires you so many hours of grinding to level up the stats you need so you can use the equipment and spells you need. How is restarting the entire game just to use another build who is almost identical to the one you previously used a fun experimentation? That's just a massive waste of time.
Dark Souls has an amazing and rewarding progression system, and on the opposite side, it can be brutally punishing too. Losing your souls and humanity too many times can set you back, and in my case, I felt I had to restart the game. But the knowledge I got from that initial playthrough stuck with me. It feels great to finally be able to use that sorcery spell you've had forever, or that giant great axe that looks badass, or to be able to not fat roll while wearing full havels. These accomplishments give power, satisfaction, and pride to the player because they happen both in the long term and the short term. Because if you're like me, then you're creating and improving your build throughout the entire game. Best part of it is, damn near everything is viable in PvE.
Remember the part when he started the video by saying he finished the game in 40 hours? Well, here's the part where he says he needed to restart the whole game again because the way he leveled up his character and his build just didn't work. So he already admits that the game became so painful to him to play. He couldn't keep going on with what he had and needed to actually restart the entire thing, meaning he wasted tons of time. But somehow playing the game halfway through and then restarting it still only took him 40 hours to beat. That's actually mathematically impossible unless again you are getting constant online help from guides and friends. So he's either lying about the timer or he straight up played the game on game journalist mode, which by his own words is a huge shame. He manages to come off as a massive hypocrite in one of his most viewed videos and one of the most viewed Dark Souls videos in all of YouTube, and the Dark Souls fandom is so stupid they just eat it up. They just couldn't see through his bullshit, even if it's so blatantly obvious. And I will tell you why they couldn't see through his bullshit. Because these losers are so desperate for confirmation bias and someone sweet talking to them that they will close their very eyes and ears to the very reality in front of them. That's how stupid and pathetic they are.
But the mechanics, the flow of combat is where the game truly shines, because it doesn't matter how upgraded your equipment is, how good your weapons are, if you can't manage this little green bar right here, if you can't dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge, and block, you ain't gonna get through shit. This green bar right here, this is your stamina, your soul, your life. Every action you take besides walking requires stamina, and it's the game's way of limiting what you're capable of. The entire game must be played around it, unless you play a cheesy glass cannon sorcery build, like a queerbo.
He just used the word dodge twice, along with some other words that don't even happen in the combat, to describe the combat. That tells you all you need to know about how bad the combat is.
Keeping with the tradition of ambiguity, the only means of directly communicating with other players in front of you is through emotes that aren't sold in loot boxes for once. Holy shit!
Imagine praising a game for not having loot boxes. See, this is what happens if you keep consuming garbage your whole life. When you play games that have actual negative score because they shouldn't even exist, since they are preying on simple-minded morons who don't know how to handle their money. Once you start playing a garbage game that's not trying to steal your money, you somehow think it's automatically a masterpiece. I have never played any game that requires microtransactions and is pay to win, and even if I did, I would never pay for any of that bullshit, because I actually know how to handle my money.
Against the AI, you have to anticipate the movements of your enemies. Charging in recklessly without a plan is bound to get you killed. Yeah, you might be able to set that first-person shooter to easy and take out everything without sweating, but Dark Souls doesn't have a difficulty setting, okay, bitch? You gotta be a man, or a woman.
By the way, the reason Dark Souls don't have an easy mode is the same reason they don't have a hard mode, and the same reason they don't have a normal mode. The developers are so stupid, they can't balance anything in these games. Everything is all over everywhere, so they just shit the game out of their anuses, tell you to play it, and if you find it hard, they are going to pretend it's because they intended to make it difficult, or if most players happen to play mages and found the games easy, they would have just pretended they intended to make the games easy. The balancing of these games is so terrible, I guarantee you there was zero testing done. The Mimic tier summon in Elden Ring is so broken, it can literally kill the hardest boss fight in the game alone, without you doing anything. And they had to nerf it by 70%. How in the world do you manage to miss the mark by 70% when you are creating something in a game? The answer is you don't. You never cared about what you create. You just throw it out, let the players test the game for you, and then you make changes accordingly. The From Software developers are just as lazy as any of the shitty Western developers. It's just that the fandom is too busy sucking the developers' dick and praising these games to see through that.
Every enemy is different, and most likely, you're going to die to each one of them at least once. However, this is where Dark Souls offers a level of mastery for the players to achieve. By learning the patterns and moves of your foes so well, you can fight them without even taking a hit. With enough time, practice, and patience, you can essentially trivialize the game across multiple playthroughs. Sometimes I get cocky because I've beaten all the Souls games multiple times, and when I start to play carelessly is when I get reminded that I can't fuck around because I'll get punished. But whether you've got a bow, magic, miracles, or a crap ton of upgraded armor pieces, you use the tools you have to your advantage, and don't be afraid to use them. Dark Souls is difficult, you've heard that a million times, but why the challenge is so renowned is because it's not bullshit difficulty. For the most part. Yes, there is trial and error, but again, that connects with the themes, with the gameplay.
And here he admits what the game is. But here's the problem. He says there is trial and error. But no, trial and error is not part of the game. It's the game itself. That's all the game is about. Trying something, see if it works. If it doesn't, you memorize that and you try something else until you see what works. Then you memorize what works and you stick to that. That's the game. There is no skill, there is no brain involved. Once again, memorizing something is a basic function of every single life form. You are not doing anything hard and you are not accomplishing anything. But since you are a loser stuck in your basement, you need to feel like you actually do something and you need to feel accomplished, because apparently you have never felt that way before and you are desperate to fill that gap inside of you.
You learn through failure. In fact, that's like the only way to learn.
Pain is an excellent teacher.
Pain is an excellent teacher, he says. Well, here's the thing. Wise people can learn from other people's mistakes. Smart people can learn from their own mistakes. And stupid people can only learn through pain and trauma, because their brains cannot actually process how something functions by observing it. They need to be actually hurt by something to learn. That's how you know which category you belong to, you idiots.
A lot of games might have the illusion of multiple enemies attacking you, but oftentimes they only attack one at a time, and act like mindless goons in the background. This is not the case with Dark Souls. Getting surrounded is a surefire way of getting your ass handed to you and sent back to the bonfire. So playing smart, observing your surroundings, and trying to go for one-on-one fights is essential to success.
You can see him getting help from an online friend right here. So much for getting good, you hypocritical scrub.
Let's talk about PvP. In the early days, it took players a while to figure out what weapons and builds were most effective against other players. It sucks to say, but there's a lot of mechanics that can be abused in Dark Souls PvP. I've run up against so many just cheesy one-shot glass cannon sorcery builds in this game. That's no fun. There's no fun going up against that every single invasion.
Why is it not fun to go against all these bullshit builds in PvP? After all, you can just memorize their patterns, understand their hitboxes, and just dodge roll to avoid them. Isn't that what you do in the single player mode as well? Oh, but I guess even a basement dweller apparently has a tolerance limit to how much time they can actually waste. After getting butt fucked for the 100th time from an invader, you kind of feel like you are wasting your time, right? But God forbid someone who actually has a life felt that immediately when they started playing these games. Oh no, they need to get good until they reach your level, but after that they can fully whine as much as they want. It's only acceptable to be as bitchy as you are. Any more or any less is unacceptable.
And for one, if you stock up on humanity, you can exploit that to pretty much heal indefinitely. There's a lot of cheese tactics too, and I've been the victim of some very questionable backstabs and hitboxes. Like, how the fuck did this arrow hit me? You serious? This was mostly forgivable in the original Dark Souls, but in the remastered version, so many of these exploits weren't fixed. See this video by Inferno Plus for a full breakdown on these bugs, because it highlights the problems with the PvP perfectly. One of the greatest things about this system are the benevolent invaders. People who invade you with the apparent intention to kill you and pilfer your humanity, but turn out to give you nice items and leave. I once had a guy invade me in Blighttown while I was dying by those toxic bastards. I had barely enough HP to survive it with no Estus left. When the invader approached me, I showed him I was out of Estus, and when I was going through the menus to drop a humanity for him so he wouldn't have to kill me, he dropped 2 for me and then black crystalled out. That type of kindness, in such a cruel, harsh world, can really bring warmth to your heart and pick you up when you're down.
This loser finds it cool when the invaders, who are actually supposed to kill you, come and help you instead. Like, honestly, how much does he need to expose himself as a scrub for people to realize it? Like I said, it really doesn't matter how good or bad you are at the game. All that matters to the fandom is whether you are complimenting the games or you are hating them. Even if I was the best player in the world, my criticism of the games alone would have all these losers to keep coming and telling me to get good. Even if I was like 100 times better than all of them, it wouldn't just matter. But if you are such a blatant scrub as the Actman here, you can get away with pretending you are good while you are blatantly showing how much of a scrub you are just because you are complimenting the games. The fans will just turn a blind eye. The whole reason they were telling people to get good wasn't really because the games required skill in the first place. It was their way of deflecting criticism. These delusional morons don't want to ever accept that the games they like are super flawed and shitty, so they can keep the lie going. They just can't admit the fact that the games they have been playing for their whole lives are not just bad, but they are also easy. They need to keep jerking themselves and believing a false narrative they themselves created, so they can cope with their miserable lives stuck in their basements.
I'd go so far as to say that this game revolutionized difficulty in the mainstream's view, because most of the bosses are so perfectly designed. They're all huge and epic, they intimidate and make us feel tiny. And even ones like Pinwheel that are super easy, or the Bed of Chaos that are cheap as hell. All these bosses offer value in either gameplay, challenge, lore, atmosphere, or all of the above. The first time going up against each one of these bad boys, I can safely say I died against all but Gwendolyn, Pinwheel, and the Demon Fire Sage. The bosses evolve as you progress, and this is demonstrated in 3 fights in particular. Stage 1 is the Asylum Demon, your introduction to bosses. This fatty is here to teach you the mechanics of these fights, and use your surroundings to your advantage. Stage 2, the Bell Gargoyles, show the player that not every fight will be straightforward, and it gives you a taste of a boss with more than one enemy. Finally, the famous Ornstein and Smo battle is Stage 3. These guys' attacks complement each other perfectly, and they attack in unison. They are what separates the wheat from the chaff. This is the point that you get the Lord Vessel in the story, to discover your destiny. And if you can beat these two bad boys, you have what it takes to beat the game. Everything you experience through these 3 key bosses are the lessons you need to know to complete Dark Souls.
I like his explanation about why the bosses are good. One is they teach you how to use your surroundings, and the only thing he shows is using a plunge attack from a high position, which is an extremely simple and blatant thing to do. You don't really learn from it, you just do it and move on. Even a 5-year-old can figure that out. There is no depth or thought to that. And the other 2 explanations of him are the multi-boss fights, which are the only cases where positioning actually matters, because it's impossible to fight 2 strong enemies at the same time. And I explained all of that in the first video part of my Dark Souls criticism series.
Probably my favorite boss fight in the entire Souls series is the 4 Kings. Because as far as I can remember, it's the only arena that can kill you instantly, and it is scary as fuck. This is the most stressful fight in the game because the kings are not only challenging, have high HP, deadly ranged and close-up attacks, but there's more than one of them. Their swords are so big they swing around behind them. I mean, the pressure to take out one king before the next one shows up as fast as possible is unlike any other pressure or stress I've felt in a video game.
What other video games have you played even? Call of Duty and Halo? Cover shooters are garbage of the highest degree for the filthiest casuals.
The utter blackness makes it hard to gauge how far away the kings are. You have absolutely no cover to hide behind, and those homing bullets track you for like 15 seconds. It's so exhilarating. The 4 Kings perfectly illustrate a well-designed boss fight in every way.
How is this a perfectly designed boss fight? He didn't even explain. They have range, they have homing missiles, it's hard to see them, and that's somehow perfect. You just learn to dodge roll their attacks and that's all there is to it. Like, there isn't much to do there. Like, seriously, how much of a simple-minded moron you have to be to think this is one of the best boss fights in all of video games? There is literally nothing interesting going on, gameplay-wise, and even visual-wise, it looks like shit. It's all so dark and you can barely see, so you need to pretty much learn purely through memory, just by looking at a few animations. You might as well play with a blindfold, it's super stupid.
In my opinion, there are some games that should be played a certain way to get the most out of them. To tie into my earlier point about how Dark Souls makes you curious, the best playthrough is your first one, because you have no idea what's around the corner, what to expect. This is why I think watching guides or gameplay before you play the game yourself is a cardinal sin. You shouldn't do that, because half the fun is discovering things on your own and getting your ass whooped.
He says that while he has admitted getting online help to gather information on how to pass certain areas, he has shown that he summoned his friends to pass through certain areas in not only this one video, but others as well. I genuinely don't know what to say about this at this point. He either has an extreme case of Alzheimer's, or he has given up on trying to make sense because he knows it doesn't matter. No matter what he says, the fandom will eat it up as long as he praises the games. This amount of blatant contradiction should have made his own brain explode, but then again, stupid people are incapable of seeing through their own bullshit.
It's not even just the enemies you have to look out for. Gravity has killed me more times than any single boss.
Okay, this one is actually really good, but I have to say it wasn't gravity that killed you, it was mostly bad camera, and the fact that you are self-aware is pretty cool. Yes, you are pretty retarded. It should have been obvious a long time ago. It shouldn't need a video game for you to realize that, but I am glad you finally did realize it.
And if you head into the wrong direction early on, you'll likely get butt-fucked by skeletons or ghosts. But if you knew where to go beforehand because you looked it up, you're forfeiting part of the experience for convenience. And here's another thing. Finding out which areas fuck you up and which ones don't makes you want to get stronger so you can go back to those areas.
You are not forfeiting any cool kind of experience, you are just wasting less time. I mean, I personally hate looking up guides for literally any game. I try to almost never do that, unless the game is cryptic to the level of complete bullshit and I'm forced to do it just to finish the game. And in the case of the Souls-likes that I played before starting this series of mine, I sincerely wish I had looked up guides so many times, because the amount of time I wasted can possibly be one of the biggest mistakes I have done in my entire life. I only hope I can manage to actually offer something from this series of mine so others can understand and learn, so my suffering and waste of time can have some value.
The temptation of new weapons, souls, plunder, and pillage is much too hard for adventurous gamers like us to refuse. That's what entices me about Dark Souls. Combined with the healing system, there's a risk-reward scenario. I mean, perhaps you're down to 2 chugs of that sweet Sunny D, but you feel close to a bonfire or special treasure. Do you risk death, your souls, and humanity to press on? Or do you turn back, play it safe, and try again? These decisions you make throughout the game are crucial. Which bonfires you kindle, if you've got humanity to spare, you've got to scrounge and collect everything you possibly can to be prepared. Thank God there's no limitations on your inventory. Every choice made by the player can have its rewards and consequences.
Yeah, to make these decisions, you don't use your brain, you just take a wild guess because you have no clue whether the game is going to screw you up and make you lose all of your souls, or it's going to handle you a bonfire and let you rest. You literally have no way of knowing that. You can try to push forward with what you have and get punished, or you can try to go back to rest at your previous bonfire, and that technically can still be wrong because you wasted that time while the next bonfire was really close. There is no correct decision to make there. You are at the mercy of the bullshit design of the developers. If they decided to kill you with something you have no way of knowing as a first timer, they will kill you. It's really that simple, and it's not interesting, nor challenging, nor fun.
When it comes to level design, art style, and feeling of the different areas, Dark Souls is perfection.
His next point is about the level design being good, which I do agree generally, but again, in the Dark Souls franchise I have seen both some of the best level design in video games and some of the worst level design as well. Like, I don't even know how these levels were made by the same people. Were they taking drugs while working or something? Some of the areas in these games are so trash it's not even funny. Like, I could try my worst to make such terrible levels and they wouldn't even come close. But their best work is definitely super good, no denying that.
I want to emphasize that Dark Souls in every aspect of its design rewards the intelligent player, the attentive player.
At no aspect in its design, Dark Souls rewards the intelligent player. It rewards the curious player, the one who doesn't mind dying, falling from a cliff and trying their chances to see if they can get to a path and being okay with wasting their time. But that has nothing to do with intelligence. It doesn't really require intelligence to figure out how to get some loot that's placed all over everywhere when the games are so buggy and broken. You think you see a path sometimes, you try to go and you just die. And many times you don't even know if you died because that was the wrong path to go or because some kind of bullshit bug happened, which means you might want to give it another try and waste even more of your time, or you decide to move on and possibly lose that item forever. It's still a trial and error thing, not much intelligence involved there.
And because the world of Dark Souls can immerse so well with its scenery, the gameplay can immerse you on the same level.
The gameplay is one of the least immersive things of literally anything, in any fiction, in any media.
New Londo Ruins throws a bunch of ghosts at you that appear from above, below, and can move through walls.
Yeah, I really wish it was only the ghosts that can move through walls. It's not like every single enemy in the entire game can do that.
The enemies you face aren't the only things hostile to the player, the environment is too. Good old Sen's Fortress, and of course, the Abyss. From Software got very creative with all the different ways they could kill you in this game, and that's something I appreciate.
Yeah, if only they got creative with giving the player mechanics and ways to actually avoid all this killing, instead of just accepting death, memorizing it and trying something else to see if that maybe works. And you appreciate that even though you pretty much cheated with guides and online help. I guess you appreciate it because it makes other people suffer and not because it makes the game good. Just another chance for you to pretend you are better at the game and telling others to get good while blatantly lying.
Most games will have very low quality rendering on the stuff that's in the background, places you can't even access. That's to save on memory. But Miyazaki doesn't give a fuck. He wants immersion, damn it, and he got it. Dark Souls puts so much effort into the backgrounds just to make you feel immersed.
It's impossible to be immersed in a dodge roll simulator. The combat alone completely obliterates the tiniest amount of immersion one could possibly have. But then again, if you are a basement dweller and you never had a fight, or you don't even understand how real fights happen in the real world, you think this kind of garbage can pretty much give you an illusion of real fighting. The enemy AI is some of the dumbest I have seen in all video games, and if you were that slow and that squishy in real life and had to pick a fight with someone who is even slightly stronger than you would be destroyed instantly. There are no invincibility frames in real life, and if your only way of defending yourself is dodge rolling, you won't even survive 5 seconds.
And another thing that kind of blows my mind is Dark Souls doesn't stop the gameplay to load in a new area. It does it seamlessly for the most part. That's an extremely underrated achievement because the necessity for a video game to load something doesn't disrupt the experience like you would expect it to.
Yeah, it doesn't stop the gameplay, but it gives you huge loading screens disguised as elevators or ladders. That's actually worse, because it wastes even more of your time and the only trade-off is a little bit of immersion.
Being able to look at something way the fuck off in the distance, get there, and look back at where you were is absolutely amazing. This is what makes Dark Souls feel epic. It feels like a real world that you don't have to watch a movie or a TV show or read a book to experience. You get to run around on your own. You have control.
This is what basement dwellers think real world feels like. You don't even have control over your very character's basic movements with how junky and clunky the gameplay is. You don't have control over shit.
Can we just take a moment to appreciate the coolest area in all of video games? Ash Lake. The first time I discovered this area after braving through the curses in the Great Hollow, I was blown away. Staring at the endless sea, the massive trees around you and thinking, maybe each one of those trees connects to a world just as massive as Lordran.
The coolest area in all of video games is a misty sky with tons of copy-pasted trees around you with shitty coloring. Am I supposed to take that seriously?
You might also think there's a lot of unnecessary climbing and running in Dark Souls, but no, you're wrong. Taking that long-ass stroll to the last surviving ancient dragon is just epic. When you run down that path, you've got 2 whole minutes to think about what lies beyond.
He seriously said that all those walking sections are actually cool because you have entire minutes to think what lies ahead, as if that means anything. No matter what you try to think, it's not even going to help you in any way in a pure trial and error game, especially when the art design is all over everywhere. It can be literally anything, it can have any kinds of moves. Like, what the hell is he even talking about? This is the kind of person that actually enjoys walking sections. Unbelievable. Walking sections are actual cancer in modern gaming. They should all be removed from every single video game in existence without a single exception. Every walking section can be a great immersive cutscene, giving the player the ability to walk without allowing them to do anything else. But go a straight line is not only the opposite of immersive, it's boring, it wastes time, and it removes replayability.
The first time going through Lordran, one of the most beautiful things about it was imagining what this place was like in its prime, before it was devastated. But now every Souls game after this has done the same thing, thrust the player into a land that's gone to shit. And it's just not as fascinating the 4th time around.
It honestly wasn't even interesting the first time, but I'm glad to know even simple-minded people can get bored of seeing the same stuff after so many times.
The characters in Dark Souls are very important, because they're the main road through which the game delivers its narrative.
His next point about why these games are good is the characters are great, and that really doesn't add much, it's just more extra lore and story. Then he just proceeds on complimenting the game while nerding out like a 10-year-old. Like, none of what you show or say is interesting, especially to someone who hasn't even played these games. This is pure catering towards the ones who already did play and want to hear some sweet talking. A bunch of nerds who don't even have the intelligence of a nerd.
After defeating the mightiest creatures in Lordran, what do you find beyond the door you worked so hard to get to? Ash. And a fading flame. You enter the kiln and find not a man, nor a god, but a hollow. A once mighty lord whose time has finally run out. A lord with nothing left but to defend the flame he cherished so much.
So what you find at the end of the game is Ash and the Hollow. I'm sure that's really similar to your real lives, because after finishing a game, you have nothing else to do in your basements, and you just go and replay the same game for the 100th time. And he spoils the final boss as well, which doesn't really matter if I'm being honest. It's not like it's interesting or fun in any way.
So it's come to this. A duel for the ages. I wouldn't have it any other way.
How is it a duel when you have a friend helping you out, first of all? And second of all, how is this a duel for the ages when this is arguably one of the easiest boss fights in the entire game? He is the easiest one to parry, and you punish him immediately and deal a lot of damage to him. There is no challenge to this guy. It's a completely shitty fight. The only good thing about it is the music. Look at how dramatic he's trying to make it. Like, how much of a 10-year-old nerd do you have to be? Jesus Christ, this fandom is so stupid.
And after delivering the final blow, do you save Lord Dran? Do you deliver it to the dark? Do you find any answers? Probably not. But you feel something. The words you'd use to define what you just experienced in the world of Dark Souls are on the tip of your tongue. You can't say it for some reason, but I think I know. A masterpiece.
So the story is not even complete, so much for being great, but he still ends up calling it a masterpiece for whatever reason. By the way, the reaction he showed at the beginning of his video for beating the game was very similar to mine. I just couldn't believe how shitty this game is. The game just kept getting worse, like a bottomless barrel.
What the fuck did I just play?
So this is pretty much where I'm going to end this video right here. It's the end of the second part. I had plans on viewing a couple of more videos that are very popular and try to explain why this franchise is so good, or the first game at least. There are some stupid videos, but by the title alone, you know they are going to be completely retarded. Like there is this guy, Never Knows Best, with a title Dark Souls is underrated. Meanwhile, Dark Souls is arguably the most overrated game that exists. I don't even know how you can rate it any higher than it already is, especially by the fans who are straight up worshipping it. Like, what else do you expect them to do? Start giving their organs for free to Miyazaki, or start spreading their butt cheeks every time they see him? Like, what else do you want them to do? The fans think Miyazaki is their god, and these games are straight up creations of a god. Then there is the guy named Sethorven with by far the dumbest title I have seen in a video, The Day the World Got Good. Like, imagine being so stupid just because a video game came out, which is terrible by the way. Not only did the industry became better, but the entire world got better. Not even better, just good. You know, everything in the world was bad. But when Dark Souls came out, all of that changed. People suddenly started having a reason to live, because apparently all these basement dwellers were just rotting there. They couldn't even enjoy the games that came beforehand, because they are completely retarded. And when a basic game, which is just a dodge roll simulator, came out, they finally found something they can actually play and beat. And now they need to pretend to the rest of us they have some kind of value. They don't. You losers don't have any value. There is a good reason why you were stuck in your basement to begin with, and there is a good reason you won't be moving out of there anytime soon. And you only want to have some copium while staying there, while your lives are passing by.